you.
It's so great to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I'm going to get up there so I can get my food when you're well enough to cook.
That would be great. I would love that.
Now I've got a mouthful of halls. I'm sorry. So let me.
No worries. No worries. I've got a big old mug of ginger tea and honey here.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So here we go. Okay. And we are up and we're ready to go in five. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope that you had a blessed, holy season. Can you believe it? I've had the flu and bronchitis, but I'm back. About 75%, 80%, but I'm getting there every day, working on it, everybody. I do hope that you had a wonderful season, and we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a world to change, everybody. Think about the bombing of Nigeria as we went into the Christmas season. And now the bombing of Venezuela and the removal of their president and his wife, who's a political force, and his son. They're all potent political figures in Venezuelan political life and in global political life. Many people have expressed shock, outrage, concern about the removal of President Maduro and his wife from their beds in the middle of the night. But the Western powers, not so much. They have said that the United States removed a narco terrorist, and that's what needed to happen. Really, there is no arrest warrant, no ICC indictment, no UN resolution from the Security Council calling for military action, none of that. No declaration of war by the US Congress. They're the ones with the power. That's the branch of government with the power. The executive branch is supposed to carry out what the legislative branch sets forth. That's their job. Somehow or another, we got this all twisted around. And now, does this mean that someone can come in to the United States and remove our president, even if you don't like the president who is in office? Do you really want that to happen? Think about that. Think about this. Effectively, we had a coup November 22nd, 1963. Arun Gupta, you and I missed that. And yet we live the specter of the killing of Kennedy every single day. It is something we have not gotten over. I don't know if America ever will, compounded with the lies and the obfuscations that we've had to live with about that awful day. So think about that, everybody. Think about when we talk about what China and Taiwan might do. Think about that. Think about having order. Was this the right thing? And then, of course, the president has said, look, all of these oil companies were making so much money. Everybody's doing so well, not the Venezuelan people, but certainly the oil companies. And he said, look, we want our oil back. That's what we want, and we're going to go back and get it. That is what he said. So Arun Gupta, brilliant journalist, you could read about him, read his works in The Nation, The Washington Post, every place in the world. Well, I've got him right now. And I said, well, let me call Arun because I need to know what you think of what happened here. Arun Gupta, welcome home to the show. How you feeling? Happy holidays and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you and your listeners, Santita. I'm doing okay. I've been, like a lot of people, battling a bug for the last couple of weeks, but I'm on the mend. So it's a doubly blessed day, being with you on the show and getting healthier. But of course, it's also with a heavy heart as to what's going on in the world right now, Venezuela. And this old style gunboat diplomacy, it's nothing than good old fashioned American gangsterism. I've said Trump is the first mafioso president, but we've always been a gangster state. We just raping, pillaging, taking what we want by force, especially across the Americas. Trump is taking it to a new level. There's no high words, soaring rhetoric about democracy or human rights or justice. This is just grubby grab for oil, for power. And I'm sure a lot of this will find his way, the wealth will find his way into his pockets. When the last time we did this, the Iraq War, illegal invasion of another oil-rich country, kidnapped another foreign leader, Saddam Hussein, and put him up on a kangaroo court where he was executed. Hussein certainly deserved to die, but he did not get a fair trial because the U.S. did not want all the secrets coming out about how they backed him for decades, how he had been a CIA asset, the brutal murders that he committed with U.S. support, U.S. weapons, U.S. money, like the gassing of 5,000 Kurds in Halabja in the late 1980s. This is going back to the Bush-Cheney years. But, hey, remember, we're supposed to like Dick Cheney now. Remember when he came on the floor of the House and the Democrats gave him a standing ovation? That was such a disgusting moment. And the reason I bring this up is because, as terrible as Trump is, and I think, where he is unprecedented is in domestic policy. He is foremost a fascist. He is, just one of the biggest criminals in history. He is carrying out this campaign of brutal ethnic cleansing. It's the Iraq War come home, right? It's the same thing where you have these mass troops invading black and brown neighborhoods, kidnapping people, imprisoning them in torture mills. That's what these immigrant prisons, or gulags as I call them, are. They're torture mills. And then deporting them, sending many off to their death. That scene of the helicopters in Chicago, that was right out of the Iraq War, where special forces rappelling in the middle of the night, blowing open people's doors with explosives, arresting everyone, terrorizing everyone. So when it comes to the domestic front, Trump is unprecedented in many ways. But on the international front, he's nothing exceptional. The boat strikes, the killing, it appears in more than a few instances of just fishermen. This is exactly what Barack Obama did. His administration had what they called signature drone strikes, where they were using algorithms to identify people based on movements, where they were driving to, where they were meeting, that would then designate them as terrorists, and then they would be killed in drone strikes. This was in Afghanistan and Pakistan, 15 odd years ago. And they didn't know who they were killing. They were just killing random people with no idea. So his boat strikes are not really any different in that regard. Then you have this kidnapping. Well, you go back to 1989. The U.S. invaded Panama, which I want to talk about more, on trumped-up charges of that the leader, Manuel Noriega, who was a CIA asset, had been for many years, known drug trafficker. The CIA covered it up. George Bush Sr., the president at this time, fully knew it. He, in fact, put him on the payroll of the CIA, knowing he was a drug trafficker. And so then they use this excuse when he no longer grows convenient to U.S. policy and they need a boogeyman. They invade, kidnap him, bring him back to New York, and imprison him for life. Then there was Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who the U.S. Was involved in multiple coups against him. The last time in 2004, he was the much beloved popular priest who became president. and who really tried to lift Haiti out of the terrible oppression it has suffered under hundreds of years of Western rule. And for that, he was punished. His supporters were killed, and he was kidnapped by the U.S. and basically sent to the Central African Republic against his will. And so now we have Manuel Noriega, the fourth time in the last 35 years or so that the U.S. has kidnapped a foreign leader, toppled their government. And this, of course, doesn't include foreign leaders who the U.S. has murdered, like Patrice Lumumba. The CIA is widely believed to have been involved in his assassination, along with the Belgians, Salvador Allende in Chile, different governments deposed. The brutal wars we've just seen conducted by the America's fascist dog, Israel, against Gaza, against Lebanon, against Yemen, against Iran. This is a rabid beast, America, rampaging across the world. But again, I don't think this is anything exceptional. You go back to the Cold War. The U.S. also deposed Trujillo, and the Dominican Republic was involved in his assassination. This is under the Democrats, of course. Kennedy and Johnson, Diem in South Vietnam, when he grew no longer convenient to U.S. policy. The U.S. CIA was involved in his assassination. So this is an old story in many ways. We should, of course, be outraged, but we shouldn't think that Donald Trump is the only problem. The rot goes to the heart of this just evil empire.
Well, talk to us about, let's go back to Panama, because that's close enough, but just far away. Give us a reminder, because it seems that there are a lot of parallels here. Would you not say?
Yeah. I mean, certainly the fact that, it was completely fabricated. Suddenly the U.S. Grows concerned about drug trafficking. This is coming on the heels of the Iran-Contra scandal. I think in many ways a much more significant scandal than Watergate. It should have brought down the Reagan presidency. The special prosecutor, Lawrence Walsh, said the entire Reagan administration, Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, his entire cabinet should have been impeached and imprisoned. They basically took the Constitution and ran it into a paper shredder. Outside of the CIA agent chief, who I believe was William Casey at the time, George Bush ran essentially a secret government. It was William Casey out of his office, where they were installing dictatorships and running death squads around the world and encouraging the development of cartels, drug cartels. And this created the world we live in today. And it was completely illegal. Iran-Contra, that scandal, the U.S. supported this brutal right-wing death squad army that was trying to topple the Sandinistas. They were revolutionaries who won in 1979, ousted a very vicious U.S. dictator, Antonio Somoza, whose family had ruled over Nicaragua for close to 50 years. And so the U.S. was trying to topple the Sandinistas because they were the threat of a good example. They were engaged in mass literacy programs, child nutrition programs, rural farming cooperatives. They were creating a better world for the vast majority of the people in Nicaragua, and the Reagan administration couldn't let that happen. So to fund the Contras, because Congress banned any funding for them, and they ended up murdering something like 50,000 people, 1% of the Nicaraguan population. That would be like almost 3.5 million Americans being murdered by death squads, the equivalent. uh, the U.S. government, the shadow government, with George Bush, William Casey, and figures like Colonel Oliver North, John Poindexter, and so on. They ran the secret government where they were trading arms to Iran. That's who was ostensibly an enemy in its war against Iraq, and they were using this money to funnel to the Contras, but it also involved shipping drugs into the United States, a massive drug operation. And in fact, there is significant evidence that the CIA helped to fuel the crack cocaine epidemic in the 1980s that destroyed so many American cities, so many Black communities, thousands and thousands killed, either from the violence of the drug trade or drug overdoses or lives just destroyed. And Noriega was heavily involved because Panama was a transshipment point for both the weapons to the Contras and the cocaine being flown into the United States. And so the U.S. knew all about this and was rewarding him, Noriega, with fat paychecks of $2,000 every week in the 1980s. That's a lot of money, back then, on top of whatever he was making. And so he grows inconvenient to U.S. policy. There's also domestic unrest at his rule. And these protests start to spread, and he clamps down on them. And suddenly, the media label him the greatest threat in the world. The media fall in line and do their jobs as basically the propaganda outlets for American empire. So the tension keeps building because the Panama Canal Zone was owned by the U.S. It was sovereign U.S. territory. The U.S. is sending all these military forces and all these weapons there, preparing for a big attack. They're also sending various forces outside of the Panama Canal Zone, essentially invading the sovereign state of Panama, trying to instigate conflicts with the Panamanian military. And eventually they succeed, and the U.S. soldier is killed. Others are arrested. And so then this is used as a justification to invade Panama. And I believe it was December 22nd, 1989, this huge U.S. force bombs and invades Panama. And the main Panamanian Defense Force base in Panama City, the U.S. is located in this neighborhood, El Chorrillos. And, Panama was the U.S. basically broke it off of Colombia. It had been part of Colombia to build the Panama Canal Zone. They imported thousands and thousands of coolies, which essentially are really just severely abused low-wage workers from Africa, from Asia, from across the Caribbean. So you have a population that is racially mixed, but is very Black and brown, like this El Chorrillos neighborhood. Well, the U.S. military basically leveled a big section of this neighborhood, completely flattened 10 city blocks. Both the Catholic and Episcopal churches estimate that at least 3,000 people were killed during this invasion in Panama. The vast majority of them civilians. There's accounts of U.S. soldiers going around setting fire to block after block to deny Panamanian soldiers any sort of military cover. Even as people were in these buildings, they wouldn't let people go back to get their belongings. People were jumping from second floors to escape the flames. There were incidents such as a U.S. tank firing on a passenger bus, killing 26 civilians. The U.S. according to human rights investigations, engaged in a systematic cover up of the massacre. They incinerated bodies, they buried other bodies in a mass grave, they took over the hospitals and morgues and stole all the records, taking them back to the U.S. Military command in the Panama Canal Zone. So this was really just an absolute horrifying war against the Panamanian people. And, there's a very good documentary available on YouTube called The Panama Deception, which people should watch. It's very well done, a lot of firsthand footage of what the U.S. did, a lot of good historical context to U.S. relations with Panama, basically acting like we own Panama. Ronald Reagan said that outright. The canal zone is ours. It's sovereign U.S. territory. It's just this complete arrogant cowboy imperialism. And I keep saying Donald Trump is the 12th Reagan administration. That since 1980, all we've gotten is Reagan administrations of one sort or the other. Doesn't matter who's in office; they're doing the same thing he was doing.
Which is what? An imperialist agenda.
Which is just ruling the world with an iron fist.
Mm-hmm.
We have to remember that Barack Obama comes to office on these soaring hopes for peace and win Mr. Nobel Peace Prize president. Well, by 2011, 2012. And during that span, he illegally bombed seven different Black and brown countries, Muslim majority countries, such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Libya. Muammar Gaddafi, that's another one. Another leader who we brutally deposed and murdered. And there's that infamous interview with Hillary Clinton cackling about it. We came, we saw, we killed him. I mean, really, that is just really just disgusting and vicious that you laugh about the brutal film, the on-air murder of a human being like that, And the fact is, say what you want about Gaddafi, he certainly lifted his people. He was an autocrat, yeah, but he also lifted his people out of poverty. He wasn't dancing to Western tunes, and now Libya has been destroyed. And it's also the Libyan war that has caused the destabilization that has caused this huge migrant outflow, into Europe and led to this fascist backlash. Or the Syrian war. Again, the U.S. very much encouraged that war to go on for years and years, with the result of hundreds of thousands of killed and millions of refugees. I mean, everything we touch, we turn to garbage, basically. So Trump is nothing new in this regard.
So where do you see this going? I mean, just you've really taken us through, what did you say, 12 successive administrations in which, the Monroe Doctrine, which they're calling the Dunroe Doctrine, well, that's been in effect. That has never stopped. So what do you see now? Where do you see this going?
Well, so, it's like I said, Trump is in many ways our first mafioso president. So one looks to be an outright theft of oil. Now, he wants American companies to go in there, but here's the thing. Oil prices have been at a low, right now. They're basically at a point at or below the cost of production for many types of oil, especially the shale oil revolution, the shale oil that has made the U.S. The number one oil producer in the world, right? This is a result of the shale oil revolution, fracking over the last 20 years. So it needs a certain floor of about $55 a barrel for producers to break even. Right now, it's hovering in that range. So bringing new oil onto the market is only going to force the price down. Now, we're going to likely see some volatility in the coming weeks and months because of this, but I'm not also sure that any American oil companies, I could be wrong, are going to want to get involved in producing oil from Venezuela when there's a question of who actually owns it. This is outright theft. You know, they do not want to be sinking billions and billions of dollars to modernize Venezuela's oil industry. Again, you know, Venezuela's oil industry was the number one target of the U.S. for over 25 years after Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999 and launched the Bolivarian Revolution, this popular revolution meant to lift up all these brown and black and Indian people out of poverty, and had some notable successes in that regard. The U.S. responded by instigating a coup against Venezuela in 2002. When that failed, it then instigated a strike in the oil sector. And thousands and thousands of those Venezuelan engineers then fled to the United States. So you see, when you see, you know, these Venezuelans cheering on the streets, it's probably these right-wing Venezuelans who benefited massively from the Venezuelan state oil industry, but those profits were not returned to the people. But then in the early 2010s, Barack Obama he labeled Venezuela a national security threat. Same thing Donald Trump has done. The first charges were filed against Nicolas Maduro, I believe, back in 2011. So again, under Obama, these charges that he was a narco trafficker, which I suspect are pretty much fabricated. And these sanctions basically devastated the oil industry, devastated the economy. This is why we've seen millions of Venezuelans flee the country. It's not because of this lie of mismanagement that they mismanaged the economy. It's because of the brutal U.S. sanctions that was strangling the economy. Sanctions have often been called financial weapons of mass destruction. So, you know, what is the U.S. plan? Yeah, certainly, I think, you know, Trump is clear they want to take over the oil industry. I'm wondering how much success that is really going to have. Secondly, I think they will use Venezuela as a base to try and destabilize other regional governments. You know, Colombia has a very left-wing government. Brazil, Lula is back in power. So they're going to use it to cause chaos throughout the region, which is not going to bode well for the people of those countries, and is going to lead to more migration pressures. In fact, we should expect to see, you know, lots of Venezuelans will probably be trying to flee now because they fear they'll be targeted by the new regime coming in for having been supporters of the Bolivarian Revolution. So whatever happens, none of it is going to be good. And Venezuela also has this conflict with Guyana, where they're trying to take over an oil-rich zone, and that's ironically something that Maduro and the U.S.-backed extreme right-wing opposition both agreed on, that they want to engage in this land grab in Guyana because it's this oil-rich region. So we may see, a conflict take place there. But it's just going to increase U.S. Meddling in the region with disastrous consequences for everyone.
Before you go, what do you want us to know? Because many of us, there is a body. I don't know how substantial it is. There's a body of Americans who feel that um, America was right to take out a narco terrorist, that they were right to go into another country, bomb it. We've not heard what's happened to people on the ground, but I saw at least one accounting of a young woman who said that she was frightened to death, but she has a brother who's in a coma because they bombed Caracas throughout the night. And they walked into, well, they raided the presidential palace and took the president and his wife out of bed. Wow. What should we be on the lookout for? As
Well,
most of us are getting our news from corporate media, and more and more of us, though, are going to independent media. How can we help to fix the lens?
Well, so first, don't believe anything corporate media says. I would highly recommend. There's also a lot of misinformation on social media. I would recommend going to sites like The Nation, Democracy Now, The Intercept, The Guardian, even the Financial Times does very good reporting. They are still these are still the gold standard for who people should be reading as to what's really going on and to the history behind all of this. Now, if we were really serious about taking out narco traffickers, we would bomb Langley, Virginia, where the CIA is located. They are the biggest narco traffickers in the world. They were heavily involved in the heroin trade during the Vietnam, Cambodia, Laotian wars, where was known as the Golden Triangle, where all this heroin was being produced and making its way back to the United States. The U.S. Put the Taliban in power, who used opium growing for heroin, poppy growing for making opium and heroin to fund themselves. The irony of what we just saw. So the Delta Force was apparently involved in the raid in Caracas, the seizure of Nicolas Maduro and the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Delta Force is one of the most elite U.S. Special Forces. There's a book that just came out just a few months ago they're located, Delta Force is stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. This book came out called The Fort Bragg Cartel, which is how there's essentially a drug cartel running out of Fort Bragg involving Delta Force soldiers. So we are sending in a unit that is tainted with narco trafficking, a military unit that is tainted with narco trafficking, allegedly to take out a narco trafficker. So don't believe anything you hear from the mainstream media. Hypocrisy doesn't even matter anymore. And like I said, Donald Trump is nothing but a mafioso president. If he could make $1 billion off of running drugs, he would do it tomorrow.
Arun Gupta, I want you to feel better.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of the work that you do. We'll be back in touch because I think the story is going to continue to grow.
It will. And folks
What you
should
think
check out my
before you go?
folks should check out my Substack, Arun Gupta. It's also called Life, the Universe, and Most Things. It's easy to find. And subscribe and read all my writings.
Absolutely. Whenever you can, Arun Gupta, everybody. Arungupta. Look him up. He's one of the first persons I called when this happened. Oh, I gotta get him. And I'm so glad that you're well enough to be here, but go on, take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Sending you much love.
Thank you, Santita. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Sending you so much love. Oh, Absolutely. I'm sending you just so much love, everybody. What do you think about what's happening here? I want you to fill in, just let me know in the chat. Andre and Mixed Capital Media and Bernadette, sending you all so much love today. We've got Dr. David Gibbs, The Revolt of the Rich. Oh my goodness, how the politics of the 70s are shaping all that we're seeing right now. Dr. David Gibbs, I'm giving the floor over to you. What are we looking at here?
It's very hard to tell, again, given we have very limited information, and most of the information we're getting is from the U.S. government, which is obviously an unreliable source in this case. What I've seen so far suggests some kind of a deal was cut between the CIA and the senior Venezuelan leadership, military and probably civilian leadership. A very striking thing, as far as I can tell, and again, I could have it wrong here, but the appearance is there was no significant fighting back by the Venezuelan armed forces, either by Maduro's security team or by the larger military. They have a significant anti-aircraft capability, a large number of anti-aircraft weapons. As far as I'm aware, none of them were fired. At least there have been no reports of them being fired. Again, maybe they're suppressing the reports. I don't know. But this suggests there was a long-term strategy of buying off large portions of the Venezuelan elite. You have very defiant statements being made by the vice president, I believe her name is Gonzalez, and other senior figures. I think the defense minister has also made very defiant statements. The big question is
Delcy Rodriguez. Delcy Rodriguez, I think it is.
Delcy Rodriguez. My apologies. It's Rodriguez. I apologize for the incorrect name there. What we've seen is defiant public statements. Whether or not they'll prove continually defiant, I guess we'll see. The big question is, why was there no opposition to the assault on Venezuela? Obviously, there's intimidation, and I'm sure there's also a lot of buying people off. There's the U.S. sanctions, which have been indeed eating away at the economy. I guess I was listening to Aaron Gupta, and he's quite right about the devastating effects of the sanctions. There's one more feature to be noted, which is that Venezuela is heavily dependent on oil exports. And there was a very significant decline in oil prices after 2014. And I think the worldwide decline in oil prices was a big factor in undermining the economy of Venezuela. In addition to the sanctions, I think there's you might say a double whammy, the sanctions and the oil prices. Until 2014, my understanding is the economy of Venezuela was not doing badly. And in fact, the Chavista reforms were quite popular and very effective. But, they can only go so far, given the fact they are an underdeveloped country, highly dependent on trade of oil. And, the United States has a lot of cards to play in terms of undermining them. This is the culmination of many years of U.S. efforts to undermine the government, and evidently with some degree of success. We just extricated the president, as I said, with no opposition. So there's the possible. I find it difficult to believe that there won't be opposition. There's the Chavista militias. There's a lot of dedicated ideological people in Venezuela. There's a lot of opposition too, but a lot of people are very strongly supportive of the Chavista government and the Chavista movement. And it seems very hard to believe there's not going to be significant violence in the future here. At the moment, this is being presented in the media as a sensational Trumpian victory, a seamless success, a victory. And that's how it's being presented. For the moment, it may well be that. I think that, well, let me stop for a moment, Santita, and see if you'd like to comment on anything I just said.
Well, no, I think it's a very interesting line that you're taking, because now you're seeing a back and forth between the president and the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez. You see the Nobel Prize winner, Mrs. Machado, who was dismissed by President Trump. So one has to wonder, certainly I began to wonder, is going on? What is going on for the public? What is going on privately? Because it seemed as if the Nobel Peace Prize winner was positioned to become the president, just to be put in there. And then she was dismissed. Was that was that for public show, or
I don't
is he
know.
really dismissive of, you know,
I find it
Delcy
very surprising.
Rodriguez? Just help me to understand, because I'm trying to make sense of all
Yeah.
of this, because the Daily Mail reported that the Colombian vice president, the former vice president of Colombia, either he's the current or the former, he felt that uh, the current president was complicit. He said
Yeah,
that's
that's
the only
right.
way that
That's
this could
right.
have worked.
That's certainly exactly that.
So
That's definitely one
help me to
possibility.
understand.
Well, in terms of, I find it very surprising that Trump is being so dismissive of Machado, and that she's an obvious replacement, one might say, perhaps a bit cynically, maybe an obvious U.S. puppet. She's very supportive of the intervention. She all along was calling for U.S. intervention. I should add, by the way, this is something of a very peculiar role for the Swedish, or I should say the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize Committee in this case, because they basically have made a partisan decision to give a peace prize to somebody, Machado, who's calling for armed intervention against her own country. Okay, it's a very peculiar peace prize, one might think, and a very peculiar role for the Nobel Committee to be
Mhm.
playing here as legitimizing a U.S. intervention. It does seem to be what they're doing. And yet, despite that, Trump is acting dismissively towards her. So I don't know what's going on. No doubt there's factional fighting going on among the interventionist elements and their supporters among the Venezuelan exiles. And for the moment, at least, it seems Trump and Rubio are gravitating towards others to be their intermediaries, possibly including the vice president herself, assuming that we're correct in the possibility that she may be acting privately in favor of the intervention. That's at least a possibility that has to be entertained, given the lack of resistance to the extrication of Maduro.
When you say there was a lack of resistance, what do you mean?
Well, again, he had bodyguards. There was no shooting by the bodyguards.
Mhm.
As I said, there was no firing of anti-aircraft missiles at the helicopters as they were approaching and leaving. Some Venezuelan armed forces have some capability in this area. And helicopters, I would assume, because they're slow and they're low altitude, would be moderately easy targets. I'm not aware of any anti-aircraft missiles being fired. And critically, there were no reported U.S. casualties at all. And so this suggests a lot of preparatory work by the CIA on the ground, probably involving a lot of money and maybe other favors as well. Promises basically that the new government that the U.S. will be orchestrating will have some role to play in it. Who knows? Certainly money would be a factor. Maybe blackmail. The U.S. also uses blackmail. There's intimidation, obviously. People are very intimidated by the United States. They should be. Maybe even more so than before, for obvious reasons. That's no doubt that was one of the reasons this was undertaken. As to motive, I think there are multiple motives. I mean, the most immediate one I can think of is that Trump had no significant, lasting foreign policy successes so far, despite all his boasting. The peace agreement between Thailand and Cambodia broke down. The ongoing Middle East war continues to be ongoing, despite Trump's claims to the contrary. And I think most critically, he's having no success in bringing any kind of credible peace agreement to Ukraine. The Ukraine war is heading towards a Russian victory, and it's very likely the U.S. can do nothing to stop that. That's going to be a big humiliation for Donald Trump when that happens. And I think that is setting in. So he's trying to pivot away from all these other conflicts into one where he thinks he can have an easy victory, or what he thinks will be an easy victory. Again, I think in the long term, this is going to go very badly. But in the short term, he can claim a victory, a flawless operation. Everyone said Trump was incompetent. People say, just to paraphrase what I think he's thinking, people everywhere saying Trump is so incompetent, but look how competent I am. I had this very competent operation. The Democrats, Biden couldn't possibly have done anything that good. That's what he's saying right now to himself, and that's what he's very likely going to be saying to the public. And he's going to be self-praising on and on. It'll give him a lot of hubris and a lot of overconfidence, which itself is going to be very dangerous.
Well, long term, where do you see this going? In the short term, you said, okay, he's got to win. But in the long term, you said, not so sure.
Well,
Why?
a good question. Where is it going long term? I think that the motives here, as I said, a short-term motive of just trying to give Trump a win in a situation where he's not really winning anywhere else. That's one. But I think in terms of larger motives, the United States wanted to try and block Chinese influence, which has been gaining ground all over Latin America, all over the world, really, and all over Latin America. He's trying to basically establish a stand here that the United States is still the dominant country, and at least in the Western Hemisphere, willing to use more or less openly criminal means to achieve our objectives, which is what he did in this case. And so obviously trying to strike a blow against China's one. Another one, of course, as he said, is to try and get his hands on the oil. A little bit of history there is Venezuela, like most countries in the Southern Hemisphere, nationalized their oil industry. They didn't cut out American oil companies completely, which continued to have a large and profitable role, but the ownership of the oil fields reverted to the state of Venezuela, as it has, again, all over the Southern Hemisphere. I think a long-term objective of the American foreign policy elite, not just Trump, but the whole foreign policy elite, has always been to denationalize oil. All right. I think that was one of the reasons the U.S. went to war in the Gulf. The second Gulf War, I think, was originally intended to achieve that objective. It didn't work, but they wanted to achieve that objective in the Gulf. And now they're trying to do it in Venezuela, which has enormous reserves. And so if they can basically establish Venezuela as a compliant puppet state of the United States or something close, they can achieve that objective, denationalize oil, let the American oil companies gain control over it, and block out all competitors. This is our oil, you see, not any other country's oil, and certainly not the Nicaraguans' oil, to steal the oil, if you want to put it crudely and simply. Again, Trump has been very open about this. Another one, I think, is to perhaps shore up the U.S. dollar, which is under threat because of declining U.S. influence generally, and to establish that Venezuelan oil, which is a major traded commodity, will be traded only in U.S. dollars and nothing else but U.S. dollars. It will not be subject to barter. It would certainly not be subject to the renminbi of China or any other currency. It would be the U.S. dollar. And so I think shoring up the dollar is another objective. And, reaffirming that even if the United States is not going to be a global power like before, it's at least, very least, going to be a regional power in the Western Hemisphere. A reorientation, you might say, of U.S. dominance along the lines of the Monroe Doctrine. And so I think that's the objective. I think the long-term effect of this is going to be more likely than not a disaster because the history we've seen here has been that quote-unquote successful interventions, i.e. ones that did not blow up in our faces right away, ones that can be called successful, give the United States overconfidence, leading to further interventions and eventually a disastrous intervention. There's been a history of this. In 1989, the U.S. invaded Panama, very similar to this one to some extent. Of course, we removed illegally the leader of Panama, Manuel Noriega, brought him to the United States on drug charges. No legal basis for that, but we did it anyway because we had the power to do it. And it was a quote-unquote success. We got what we wanted. That led to a tremendous hubris, leading to the first Gulf War, where the United States, again, defeated the Iraqi army, seemingly at low cost. Actually, the cost was high because of Gulf War syndrome, but we didn't know that at the time. So again, leading to even more hubris, leading to interventions, the intervention in Somalia, which was a disaster. We had to pull out of Somalia. It was a humiliation of the United States. The interventions in Bosnia and Kosovo seemed like successes. They weren't successes, by the way, in the sense that basically they never restored order in those countries. They're still basically like colonies, essentially. Kosovo and Bosnia basically are essentially colonies of NATO. They still have peacekeeping troops there. They've been there for 30 years. They'll be there maybe for decades more. But nevertheless, it was presented as a success. That, of course, led to the Iraq War, and the Afghanistan War, which were disasters. The U.S. became overconfident. We figured if we could do what we did in Bosnia and Kosovo, we can walk on water. We can do anything. The laws of gravity don't apply to us. Hence, it led to new interventions. That's very likely to happen here. Okay, Trump is very reckless. He is very uncontrolled. And I think now that he's had this quote-unquote sensational success in extricating Maduro, he's going to do something frankly stupid, like maybe send ground forces into Venezuela, become involved in ground combat. He very, very could easily trigger a civil war, or at least large-scale civil disorder in Venezuela, and have U.S. forces involved in that civil war. That would go well. That would go really well. I think that's a possibility. He could become so arrogant he might decide to try and once again, second time, overthrow the government of Iran. in cahoots with the Israelis. Right? Didn't work very well the first time, but he might think the second time will be a charm. If the first time doesn't work, you try again. After all, look how confident we are. We succeeded in Venezuela. We can do anything. So we'll try and overthrow the government in Iran, an enormous country of almost 100 million people. There are all sorts of places you could intervene. You could decide to once again ramp up the war in Ukraine, make one more go at trying to defeat the Russians. He might try and provoke some kind of armed confrontation with China. Who knows? I think the bottom line is there's a long history of the U.S. getting on an interventionist treadmill. One intervention always leads to another intervention and another and another. And eventually it leads to disaster. And I fear that's what we're headed to here.
Is there any way out?
Well, I mean, sure, there's a way out.
Do you see us going down the rabbit hole? I mean, because now we're looking at perhaps a trial of the Venezuelan president on American soil.
Yeah.
It seems to me that legally that is on shaky ground.
Yep.
Don't you try a president in the International Criminal Court? I mean, it's just something about this just doesn't seem completely thought through, Dr. Gibbs.
No, it doesn't. I am not a lawyer, but the legality of this, of taking a president by force and at night, putting him on a helicopter, taking him to the United States, and then trying him in court, it's a brazenly illegal act. It's essentially an act of war, completely unjustified act of war under the UN Charter. It's an act of aggression, a military aggression, therefore a crime. Okay, we've signed the UN Charter, all right, and the UN Charter forbids war, except in self-defense or when authorized by the Security Council, neither of which are present in this case. So this is a completely illegal act by the United States. Although hardly the first one. The U.S. regularly breaks international law, particularly the UN Charter. Very seldom has the United States had UN authorization to act militarily. We act whenever we feel like it. So yeah, the legality of this is the illegality is clear cut. What's the way out? I mean, at this point, I suspect there is no way out. I was hoping, Trump would, be influenced by the fact that he said America first. He talked about we should celebrate not just the wars we win, but the wars we don't start. I was hoping he would start. He's always talked about I'm not so interested in what goes on in overseas. I'm not that interested in Ukraine. I'm interested in what happens in the United States, what happens in Ohio, what happens in Nebraska, which I think has some validity, actually. I mean, maybe he should be more concerned about the domestic situation and less concerned about overseas wars. I was hoping that kind of idea would appeal to him. But evidently, he's been influenced in the other direction. Obviously, Marco Rubio here was Secretary of State. And I think he's been very influential in this. He has a personal grudge against not just Venezuela, but of course, Cuba. He was born in Cuba. He's very anti-Castro and very anti-Cuban government. And therefore, by extension, he's anti-Venezuela because of the close ties between Venezuela and Cuba. So, I mean, it could be this is on an irreversible course, that Trump now is feeling his pride and feeling his enormous success, and he's being egged on by his aides to do more. And he's listening increasingly to aides who want him to do more in terms of more military intervention. And so that's where I see this going, is more intervention, beginning with Venezuela itself and then in other areas of the world as well. And that can't go well in the long term. And in Venezuela, I don't think it's going to go well in the long term either.
Dr. David Gibbs, we will just have to see where this goes, because it's getting confusing. What is not unclear is that the United States conducted a coup and kidnapped the president. And
That's right.
That can't be. Dr. Gibbs, what's your final word about that? Because that's what we woke up to yesterday. And it just seems that we're all a bit shell-shocked by it.
Well, I think that one of the things that should be asked, given his focus on America first, is how does this help the American people? All right. We've already talked about the effects it'll have in Venezuela on international law, on the world. But how does it affect the American people? I think the effect it will have, basically, is to lower living standards, because money spent in overseas interventions, which are extremely expensive, will not be spent raising living standards in the United States, improving healthcare, improving education, raising wages. It will not do those things. It will detract from those things. And so I would hope that basically more emphasis would be put on living standards in the United States, and more recognition would be given to how these overseas interventions lower our living standards and weaken our security. I mean, obviously, there could be retaliation against the United States, including terrorism. And this is a real, um, I think, a threat to the American, the positive features of the American way of life in terms of high living standards and high security. It can't be good for that in the long term.
Dr. David Gibbs, I will see you before the week is out, because I know there's much to discuss, because we have to see, I guess we're going to see the president taken to court.
Yeah.
It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And as you've said, as we're watching our health care costs go through the roof, as 20 million at least American families are looking at having no health care coverage at all, as more and more of us are hungry, not food insecure, we're hungry, as more and more of us just can't go to school, can't finish. There is just so much. Americans are really, bankruptcies are soaring in private businesses. It's just, the sun is dim on the horizon. And I'm wondering where we're going to go from here. Dr. David Gibbs, The Revolt of the Rich. If you want to understand what happened in Venezuela, you need to read this book, because I really think, what did my father say? Slave masters never retire. That's it. And that's what your book tells us. They don't retire. And they have been revolting. And they've tried to have a takeover of another country. But it's not 1823, everybody. That's when we got the Monroe Doctrine. It's 2025. I don't know if the Venezuelan people will allow people just to walk in and take their government from them, and take the Chavista reforms away. Don't know if that's going to work. Dr. David Gibbs, it's always a joy to be with you. Happy New Year.
Thank you very much, Santita. Pleasure. Bye-bye.
AM 950 Radio, everybody, the voice of progressive Minnesota. One more hour. Come on and join me.